Well, good afternoon and welcome to this rather belated second Vietnamese language class for travellers. My name is Mark Boya and I'm in Hue in central Vietnam, spelt H-U-E and pronounced Hue. As you may recall in our previous lesson, you follow the line. So in the case of Hue, it goes up, so you go up. So you say Hue, Hue, and Hue is a fascinating place. It doesn't seem to leave a very positive mark on many travellers because its historical offerings aren't all that well presented, but this really is a fascinating city, and I recommend if you're travelling to Vietnam that you give some time to Hue. It deserves more than the sort of 3 hours or 4 hours or 1 day that travellers seem to be allocating it increasingly these days. But anyway, what's interesting about Hue? Well, I'm actually sitting right at the front of Hue Citadel, and this was built at the beginning of the 19th century, and it was the palace, if you like, of the Nguyễn Dynasty emperors. So there's another word for you, Nguyễn. You would have seen that very, very frequently. Nguyễn, N-G-U-Y-E-N. Now you'll notice Nguyễn has what's called a dấu ngã, and ngã is pronounced, it kind of goes up and down, it's quite a dramatic one, and so you say Nguyễn, 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 and this is where the emperors of the Nguyễn Dynasty resided from 1802 when these walls were built, and behind the walls you'll actually find the imperial city. Up until 1945, when the last emperor, Bảo Đại, he abdicated in favour of Ho Chi Minh, and that was the end of the Nguyễn Dynasty. So they were based here. So Hue was actually the capital of Vietnam for that period. In many views, certainly in official Vietnamese history, it wasn't a very glorious period because, of course, the poor old Nguyễn Dynasty started their reign just as the French interest in Vietnam was starting to take hold, and so they spent most of the Nguyễn Dynasty was blighted by French colonialism, and most of the Nguyễn Dynasty emperors ended up being puppets for the French. Those who didn't comply with French wishes ended up out of the palace.
And while we're speaking of the Nguyễn name, it's worth noting that the strength of the Nguyễn clan over many centuries, climaxing with the founding of the Nguyễn Dynasty here in Hue in 1802, is the reason an estimated 40% of Vietnamese carry the Nguyễn name. If you know any Vietnamese, you'll know just how common this name is. It was good politics back then to share a name with the ruling family. On another note, this citadel's role in Vietnamese history didn't end with the demise of the Nguyễn Dynasty in 1945. 23 years later, in 1968, the most important battle of the Tet Offensive and one of the most deadly of the Vietnam War raged here. The Viet Cong flag flew from this flag tower for 25 days before Hue City and the Citadel were recaptured by US and South Vietnamese forces. The scars of battle are still visible on the Citadel walls. Hue finally fell back into communist hands in March 1975, a month before the complete demise of South Vietnam and the humiliating US withdrawal.
So that's enough about Hue for now. There's tons more information on Hue, of course, on Rusty Compass. Let's talk about Vietnamese. Today we're going to talk about food. Our second lesson is about food. And Hue is an interesting place to both conduct a Vietnamese lesson because the people of Hue have their own accent that's very, very distinct. Not one that I'm able to share with you because I don't really know how to speak tiếng Hue. I think they say tiếng Hue. But anyway, it's a very distinct accent all of its own, and it also has its own vocabulary. But not only that, Hue is also renowned for its own very distinctive cuisine that really is very special. And absolutely different to anything else you're going to encounter elsewhere in Vietnam. But there are Hue restaurants in Saigon and Hanoi, some very good ones. Before we talk about food, I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about the Vietnamese relationship with food, because it occurs to me that the Vietnamese have a particularly close relationship with their cuisine. Of course, all people have a close relationship with cuisine, but the Viets, I think, are particularly passionate about their food. And it seems to permeate the language as well. So when the Vietnamese greet you, we already learnt in the previous lesson the greeting "Khỏe không?" "Khỏe không?" The next sentence in Vietnamese is likely to be "Anh ăn cơm chưa?" "Anh ăn cơm chưa?" Anh being brother, or so addressing a male, they'll say "Anh," "Ăn," which means eat. "Ăn," very important word. "Ăn." The next one, really important word, "Cơm." Cơm is rice. So you're going to see that everywhere. And so the Vietnamese will ask you, "Anh ăn cơm chưa?" And that means, have you eaten rice yet? "Anh ăn cơm chưa?" And that gives you a sense of, your well-being is measured by when you last had rice. So the Vietnamese, as I say, the greeting will run, "Anh có khỏe không? Anh ăn cơm chưa?" And that is a completely normal greeting in Vietnamese. So the first question when someone asks you about how you are, they're going to ask you whether you've eaten, which I think sort of shows how important food is in the Vietnamese language. There are lots of other examples as well. I like the fact that the Vietnamese consider someone who we in English would say is good-hearted as being someone with a good stomach. They say someone is tốt bụng. Rather than good-hearted, in Vietnam you have a good stomach, which means tốt, which means good. Tốt bụng. Tốt bụng. Bụng means stomach. And again, tốt, you'll see the T and then the O with a hat and then going up. So it's tốt, tốt. And bụng. Bụng has a dot. That's called a dấu nặng. And when you use that dot underneath a word, it really compresses the word. It makes it a very abbreviated, quite strong sound. So bụng, bụng, B-U-N-G, but it's sort of pronounced more like B-U-M, bụng, bụng, and it's very abrupt. It's not elongated at all. It's a very abrupt sound, which, as I say, I think elevates, makes a kind of food connection as well. There are other examples. The Vietnamese speak of partaking of a festival or a party as eating the party. So in Vietnam, the biggest festival of the year is the Tết festival, the New Year festival, the Lunar New Year festival. And here it's known as Tết. And again, you see the rising tone, Tết. So you go up, Tết. And so the Tết festival, Vietnamese describe participating in that festival as eating the festival. So they'll say, "Năm nay anh ăn Tết ở đâu à?" So this year, where are you going to eat Tết? So năm nay means this year. Anh, brother, you've heard that before. Sẽ, will. Ăn, eat. Tết, ở đâu à? Or ở đâu. Ở đâu means where. Ở đâu. And again, you'll say ở means where, or ở đâu means where, and you'll see the high, and then đâu, D-A-U, pronounced đâu. So, ăn Tết ở đâu? Where will you celebrate Tết? But as I say, in Vietnamese, they're going to say eat Tết. The Vietnamese don't only say ăn Tết, they also say ăn tiệc. So, ăn tiệc. Tiệc means party. T-I-E-C, also with the dot. Tiệc. Tiệc, again, very abrupt. Tiệc. T-I-E-C. Now, I won't focus too much on the pronunciation of non-food words in this class, but I think there's another example, I think, about that sort of reverence that the Vietnamese have for food, though, and how central it is in the language. Or there are a couple more that come to mind. One is the Vietnamese describe a good sleep as a delicious sleep. So when if someone bids you a good sleep, they'll say Chúc ngủ ngon. Chúc ngủ, which means sleep, and again you'll see that dấu hỏi. Chúc, up, chúc ngủ ngon. Now here's some really important pronunciation practice you're going to need to do if you want to nail the word ngon. I find the NG sound is one of the hardest things foreigners encounter, although I think it's mainly just a block rather than being something that's rational. Because in English we actually do, surprisingly enough, make that sound, but we never make it at the start of a word. So let's focus on this word ngon, ngon, which means delicious. So you're going to want to say that while you're in Vietnam. You're going to want to tell people that the meal you just had was really ngon. And to say ngon, well, it's N-G-O-N, pronounced ngon. So you're probably struggling with that. Most foreigners start to say non or nyon, but it's ngon, ngon, ng, ngon. So how can I help you to say that? Well, I think the best way to learn how to say ngon is start saying hang on, the English words hang on, hang on, hang on, hang on. And then let's cut the first part off. Hang on, ngon, ngon. Okay, it's not a perfect transition from hang on to ngon, but it's pretty close. So start thinking about starting a word with an ng instead of ending it. So we say hang, and when we say hang on or hang on, cut off the HA and just go hang on, ngon, 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 and that means delicious. So you're going to want to say ngon a lot while you're in Vietnam, and if you want to tell someone their food was very, very delicious or very ngon, you're going to want to say ngon lắm, or rất ngon lắm, or rất ngon. And finally, when talking about this whole reverence and centrality of food in the Vietnamese language, I wanted to say give you one last example, and that is I find this, and perhaps I'm wrong, but it seems to me Vietnamese are very reluctant to say they don't like a meal. So you have a meal, or you propose that you eat something with a Vietnamese person, and they're going to say to you, instead of saying I don't like to eat something, they're going to say I don't know how to eat that. So they're going to say, oh, xin lỗi, I'm sorry, xin lỗi, tôi không biết ăn. Tôi, me, I, không biết, which means don't know, ăn, which means eat. Tôi không biết ăn, tôi không biết ăn. And of course they do know how to eat it because they know how to eat. But the Vietnamese will tend to say tôi không biết ăn rather than tôi không thích ăn, which means I don't like to eat that food, which I think again sort of shows a reverence for all cuisine, even food that you don't like to eat. Rather than say you don't like it, you say you can't eat it or you don't know how to eat it.
Well, we can't wrap up this food language class without a look at Hue's most famous dish, a spicy soup known as bún bò Hue. These days, bún bò Hue can be found all over Vietnam, but there's no better place to try it, of course, than in a simple street stall right here in Hue.
In production.
I headed out with an old friend, local Mr. Koo, to his favourite bún bò stand, which he describes as Binh Dân. Binh Dân means of the common people or ordinary people, and you'll see this word everywhere as you travel through Vietnam at small eateries. It denotes a simple local stall. Well, that's it for this lesson. The next lesson will also be about food, but with more focus on the essential food vocabulary for travel. Thanks for watching, and talk to you again soon.